Okay, welcome to part 2 of Let's Move Mojave. No, you're not supposed to have a favorite baby, but this is my favorite baby. Part 2 ends up being kind of some big aha moments for a lot of people, making some of the bigger connections of what's going on chemically as far as chronic pain goes. Where we're going to start the conversation off, though, we're going to start the conversation off talking about stress. Chemically speaking, chronic pain and chronic stress are chemically very synonymous. Okay. But in order to understand chronic stress, we have to first talk about acute stress. So, if you can think for a moment, what is the acute stress hormone? It's the fight or flight hormone. Some people are junkies for it. If you said adrenaline, you're right. Okay. Now, what does adrenaline do to the body? Okay. So we think of that kind of like pumped up, ramped up sort of state. All right. The first thing, it increases heart rate, respiratory rate, and blood pressure. Why? Well, we need to get high oxygenated blood places. What places might you ask? Well, we're increasing that blood flow, okay, to the big muscles. This is so we can run faster, jump higher, punch harder, lift the car off the baby. Okay. What else? Well, we're also going to see an increase in attention to threat. Movies are really good at showing this. Okay. So maybe it's the tunnel vision that we see our protagonists have. Maybe it's the muffling, changing of our auditory processing. Okay. Or temporal distortion where time seems to slow down a little bit. All those are real phenomena associated with adrenaline. The next one, okay, decrease in sensitivity to pain. Again, movies are really good at showing this. The protagonist or the friend, they're shot. Do they notice it during the firefight? No. Small cuts or things like that, minor injuries, usually kind of just they ignore and they kind of move on with the fight or the run or the fleeing, whatever the case may be. All right. This is not an exhaustive list, but these are the big ones that we're going to really, when most of us think about how it feels to be under an adrenaline rush. But there are many more. If we're sending all the blood flow to the big, strong muscles, we're taking blood flow away from other areas. So, every single horror movie you've seen, okay, somebody's running away from the monster through the woods. What happens? They trip and fall. So, decrease in balance. Same thing, every single horror movie you've ever seen. If the person is being chased by the serial killer, if they could just get their car keys into the car door or the house keys into the house door, they'd be safe. They pull them out, and what happens? They're shaking or they drop them. Okay? So decreased balance and decreased coordination. What else? Well, we're sending all that blood flow to the big, strong muscles. This is called fight or flight. The opposite of fight or flight is called resting and digesting. So we're taking blood flow away from the GI tract as well. So decreased blood flow to the GI tract. Think stomach and intestines. Some people will get very, very nauseous or even throw up under adrenaline. In extreme circumstances, some people can even soil themselves. We don't want potentially infectious material in our abdominal or peritoneal cavity in case we're mortally wounded, so it'll try to get rid of stuff. All right. Do you think you're really good at sleeping when you're under adrenaline? That'd be a problem, right? So decreased ability to sleep. Think you're really good at chit-chatting, making small talk, making friends? No. So we see some emotional lability as well, kind of being all over the map. Fight, flight, or even freeze, right? So some people are ready to throw hands. Other people are ready to advance in the other direction. Or some people get the deer in the headlights look, okay? And last but not least, do you think most people are interested in making babies? Actually, no. We see that system shut down too. So we're going to see a decrease in libido. We're not really worried about advancing the species if we might not survive. Now, again, obviously not an exhaustive list, but a lot of the things that adrenaline is going to influence in the body. Now, we can't stay under acute stress long time. It's bad for us. It would kill us, especially because that first one is so profound. All right. So after we've been under stress for long enough, we switch over to a long-term stress hormone. All right. That one is called cortisol. So take a moment if you're watching this, and I want you to think about this is the short-term stress hormone, and this is the long-term stress hormone. From this list, what does cortisol not do that adrenaline does do? So just take a moment to kind of think of that, looking at that list. What does cortisol not do that adrenaline does do? A couple of the very common ones that people will guess is they'll say, well, it doesn't affect their heart rate, respiratory rate, blood pressure. Interestingly, it actually does. Well, it definitely doesn't affect, it doesn't decrease their sensitivity to pain. Unfortunately, yeah, that one is affected too. Well, it doesn't affect blood flow to the muscles and things. And in the class setting, we find out this is actually a trick question. The reason why we stick to this list is because cortisol does all of the same things on this list, okay? Or at least it can influence these things. So that's why the last category is so important. And that category is the consequences, or also kind of the why. Why are these things going on? We'll talk about that. So we know that stress in general, it can affect these things. And these being elevated, they're all cardiovascular risk factors, right? We don't want to have high blood pressure. We don't want our heart rate to be elevated all the time. But we do see that long-term stress can affect this. So sometimes people have a watch or a device that tracks their heart rate. They'll come in and they'll say, I don't get it. My resting heart rate used to be in the 50s or 60s. Now every time I look at it, it's in like the 70s, 80s even. Okay. Or they'll say, hey, I went to the doctor. They said you're pre-hypertensive. You don't have high blood pressure, but you're pre-hypertensive, or the kind of the classic white coat syndrome. Respiratory rate. If somebody is my patient, I'm working with them one-on-one, I'm always looking at how people breathe. If you're using your neck muscles to breathe, that is exclusively a stress function. Okay, it doesn't actually help you get in more oxygen. So neck breathing, really good sign that that system is stressed. Moving on to the next one. What do you think the consequence to increase blood flow to the big muscles is? So again, the muscles that are going to make you run faster, jump higher, lift the car off the baby. Well, we know that these are consequences of increased blood flow to the big muscles, but I want to know what happens to the big muscles themselves. So they're going to end up being tired. They're going to end up being sore. They're kind of overworked and underpaid. They're doing everything all the time. And I'm sure none of you at home have this issue, but if you did, it wouldn't be uncommon. None of you at home have any knots, especially not in the neck or between the shoulder blades or down in your low back and hips, down the backs of the legs, right? Never even heard of those. All right, all joking aside, we'll talk about that in a little bit more here in a moment. But moving on to the next one, increased attention to threat. Now, ideally, you've seen part 1 recently. So part 2, threat is one of my favorite words. It's still one of my favorite words. So we said during part 1, threat is the signal that the body sends to the brain. The brain processes that information, and the output is pain, right? So what do we have increased attention on when we've got chronic pain? Pain. You wake up. What are you thinking about? Pain. You have to go to physical training in the morning. What are you thinking about? Pain. Long car ride. What are you thinking about? Pain. If you're going to go even on a social outing, what are you thinking about? Pain. It ends up being a major limiting factor. And so what we end up kind of having is we have decreased attention to basically everything else. We say decreased attention to task. And sometimes we lovingly refer to this, as brain fog. And again, more on that soon. Decrease in sensitivity to pain. This is definitely one of the ones. This doesn't make any sense. But in order to kind of understand this a little bit better, we're going to go back to part 1 for a second. So if I draw this, you all know what it is. This is going to be the alarm system, right? We set that very arbitrary level. Okay, we say that it's that sensitive. Okay, we know that that's the threshold. That's how high we have to get the system triggered in order to trigger, in this instance, pain. So what do adrenaline and cortisol do to this line, the threshold? They move it up, right? We're going to increase that threshold, so therefore it's harder to trigger pain. But there's something weird that's happening for those of us with chronic pain, right? What's happening to this line? It's also going up, okay? And what we see over time, especially with chronic pain, it will just chase that new threshold. So apples to apples, you kind of do have a higher pain tolerance or a decreased sensitivity to pain. However, the consequence, especially with chronic pain, is we have an increase in the sensitivity of the system. So it's easier to trigger. All right, decreased balance and coordination. Am I saying that because you have chronic pain, you're going to fail your next DUI test because you can't keep your balance? Well, thankfully, no, that's not what I'm saying. But when we think about balance and coordination, what muscles are responsible for balance and coordination? They're the little muscles. And what do little muscles do that I'm doing right now and y'all are doing at home right now? There are posture muscles. So when we see that we're constantly sending this blood flow to the big muscles, send the blood flow to the big muscles, send the blood flow to the big muscles. Okay, we see that constantly happening. We're taking all this blood flow away from those small stabilizing posture muscles. This is where, unfortunately, we can start to see increased pain with static positions. It hurts to stand. It hurts to sit. I can't be in a car for more than 45 minutes without my back hurting. I can't find a comfortable position lying down trying to fall asleep. Why? Because I'm trying to do that with the big muscles. Those big bar-shaped muscles down your back, your upper trap, those are meant to lift the car off the baby. They're not meant to help you stand or sit in a chair. Okay? They're doing way too much and they're really bad at that job. We need the small muscles in order to be stable and feel secure and feel good when we're in a static position. Okay? Decreased blood flow to the GI tract. So again, your stomach and intestines. Why would that be a problem? Well, again, we're talking about digestion, right? So this is where we can see if we start interfering with that process, we can see some nausea. Okay? But remember, this can do some weird things to the system, right? We said that for some people, it's not going to prioritize digestion. So we might end up with a little bit of constipation. But for some people, the system wants to get rid of stuff, right? So for other people, they might have diarrhea. And then if you're really lucky, okay, a diagnosis that's almost congruent or synonymous again with chronic pain is IBS, irritable bowel syndrome. So sometimes your stomach is really upset, really gassy or constipated, but then you have a period of diarrhea or everything seems okay. You can never quite find the trigger. What's going on? All right. Decrease in sleep. I could actually teach a part 3 for this class just talking about all the bad things that happen when we don't prioritize sleep or when we don't get enough sleep. But I want to talk about what a decrease in sleep leads to as far as increase. Okay, so I'll give you a hint. A decrease in sleep leads to an increase in something that's already on the board in big letters. If you guess stress, you're 100% correct. So a decrease in sleep leads to an increase in stress. Why would that be a problem? Right? So what do we have? We have a decrease in sleep. That leads to an increase in stress, which leads to what? A decrease in sleep, which leads to increased stress. Round and round and round we go. And by the way, you're welcome to insert anxiety and depression on either or both sides of this equation. I'm anxious, which makes it hard to sleep, which only increases my anxiety and stress, right? Which makes it harder to sleep. Or I'm depressed, okay? So I'm not relieving stress because I don't have the energy or I don't feel like doing things, right? And then that stress or even the depression, just the chemical stuff that's going on, makes it hard to sleep, which only makes the depression worse, which increases my stress, which makes it harder to sleep. But if you're really lucky, you have the spicy SADs, and that's where you're stressed about being depressed and depressed about being stressed, and you can't sleep and you're more stressed all the time. Good times, right? Okay. So unfortunately, again, another part of the process that can self-perpetuate here. Moving on, emotional lability, again, being all over the map. Think about work structures, okay, especially here in the military where we have rank. Why would it be a problem if you at home, maybe you're a specialist or you're a sergeant, okay, and you start yelling at captain or major so-and-so, you just fly off the handle and you're yelling at them. It's not going to go well, right? But conversely, what if you have people who work below you? Okay, you're in some sort of managerial position and you're yelling and flying off the handle at your subordinates. Are they going to like you or respect you? No. Well, what about if you just don't talk about your issues or you avoid conflict? Is that healthy? Well, we know that's not good either. And not only is it not good in a work setting, but it's not good in the home setting. Okay. Remember, fight, flight, or freeze. Again, some people are just ready to fly off the handle and yell and scream and fight, and other people are just, I want to avoid conflict. I want to get away from this. Some people just freeze up and they don't know what to do. That is going to lead to work and relationship issues. Okay. Last but not least, libido. Sex is an important, healthy part of most relationships. Okay. What we can see for normal, healthy sexual function, men and women need a decrease in blood pressure. Unfortunately, with a stressed out system, that is the exact opposite that is happening. Okay, so this can lead to functional issues. Okay, especially men, we identify that as ED. But again, with it being an important part of the relationship, can also be relationship issues again. So what do y'all think? Does anybody feel like they're looking at a self-portrait? It's kind of a tough pill to swallow to kind of look at all this stuff and think how much it could be interrelated. The number of patients that come through and they say, I don't get it. I'm a 20 something. I've never had issues with this. Or to say, I don't get it. It used to be so easygoing. Now it seems like I fly off the handle at the drop of a hat. Or I don't want to talk to people about what's going on because nobody understands what I'm going through. Or I don't want to be a Debbie Downer, so I don't want to talk about this with anybody else. Number of patients, they come in, I've had a camera every direction it can go. It went this way, it went this way. I took the pill, that's a camera. Nobody can find anything wrong with me, but I'm sick to my stomach all the time. I have to know where all the bathrooms are. I have to be really careful about what I eat. But even then, it doesn't seem to matter. I don't get it. It hurts to sit in a chair. Why does it hurt to sit in a chair? I'm young and otherwise healthy. This is stupid. I don't get it. I used to be really good at multitasking. I never had to write anything down. Or I was really good at, remembering all of the things that I had to do, or remembering the grocery list, or remembering phone numbers. And now everything seems so mentally draining. I feel overwhelmed all the time. I don't get it. I go to the chiropractor or I get a massage, I do cupping, I do dry needling, and I'll feel better for a couple of days. But then the knots, they just come back. Why? Well, if you've got a chemical signal whose job it is to create these symptoms, if we don't address the chemical piece, those symptoms aren't going to go away. And that can be what's so frustrating. You go to the doctor, and if somebody just tells you, oh, well, you're stressed out, if you just, breathe and relax a little bit, you'll feel better. That's silly, right? Okay. But unfortunately, now you can see why. You can actually see, what does the chemical do? Therefore, what am I feeling? To be able to actually make that connection. You always want to make sure, again, here's the disclaimer. We don't jump and just say, oh, well, it's stress. Don't worry about it. No, we always make sure your heart is good. We always make sure that the muscles are good. Do the blood tests. Make sure your heart, make sure your GI tract, those internal organs, everything's working the way it's supposed to. But if you keep coming back to the same message that you are healthy, stress might actually be to blame. Okay. All right. Well, as fun as this is to talk about the stress chemicals, we're going to move on to a different chemical. I kind of allude to this during part 1 and say, hey, we're going to talk about this in more detail during part 2, but we still don't get crazy far in the weeds with this chemical. It's a whole group of chemicals, though, and it might be familiar to some of you. and it might not to others. But the group of chemicals that we're going to talk about are called interleukins. Now, if leukin looks familiar, we're talking about that immune system. Remember, we talked about the different sensors and we said, hey, these immune sensors, those inflammatory chemicals, those are what can be triggered as well with the sensors on the nerves. These are those chemicals that we're going to start to talk about. Now, we're going to talk about two specific kinds of interleukins. The ones that are anti-inflammatory and the ones that are pro-inflammatory. Now, before I get too far ahead, is everybody at home aware you have to have inflammation in order to have healing? We need a chemical signal that says, hey, there's something wrong here. There's damaged tissue. Okay? Bring the chemicals in to clean up the old stuff, take it out, move it away. And then bring in new stuff. And once we bring in the new healthy tissue, to lay it down. Once we lay it down, then we need a final stage to say, hey, I'm going to make this look nice and pretty. Okay, make sure everything looks great there. And once we get to that last stage, that remodeling stage, we need a chemical signal that says, we have everything what we need. Go ahead and slow the process down. So when life is good, these are in a really healthy one-to-one balance. Okay. Most people that are going through this class, unfortunately, not here because life is good, right? So which way do you think this scale is tipped? Yeah, it's tipped towards pro-inflammation. So we end up with more of these chemicals that kind of cause inflammation, and we have less chemicals that can mitigate or slow that process down. Now, when we talked during part one, we said, hey, this is a superpower. Our grandparents can predict the weather, right? Yeah, they've got more of these pro-inflammatory chemicals kicking around. The weather changes, kicks even more of it up, and they've got more scar tissue to kind of poke at. However, even in young, healthy people, when you have chronic pain, this is where we can see, unfortunately, you're like, I don't get it. All I did was sprain my ankle. Why is it taking so long to heal? I feel like it takes me so long to recover from an injury. What's going on? Well, if you have too many of these chemicals cruising around the body, cruising around your immune system, it's going to take you longer to heal and recover. Now, as I mentioned, these are all over in the entire body, so that does include our GI tract. If you are otherwise healthy, you have no reason to worry about this, but these chemicals can build up in our guts as well and cause issues like colitis or gastritis. Very significant issue, nothing to worry about, again, without other underlying conditions, but it is technically something that can happen and still be associated with chronic pain. Now, I keep repeating this point. These are all over in the body. So that does include the central nervous system as well. But when I say central nervous system, I don't just mean the brain. I mean the brain and the spinal cord. So if I draw this around the brain and the spinal cord, and I tell you it's not a bone, and it's also not the Better Business Bureau, but it is abbreviated the same way. Okay, does anybody know what that is? If you said the blood-brain barrier, you're correct. We don't want just anything getting into our central nervous system because meningitis doesn't tickle. Okay, so the body has, relatively speaking, its own set of interleukins, and then the brain and the spinal cord, they kind of have their own set of interleukins, and they really don't mix. Okay. Unfortunately, if we have chronic pain and we start to get too many of these, especially in the central nervous system, as an act of self-preservation, what will happen is the permeability of the blood-brain barrier will change specifically to these interleukins. So don't worry, you're not magically at risk of meningitis. Nothing to worry about. But it does allow these ones from the body to start to come into the central nervous system. Now, we already had too many to begin with, and now we end up with even more of this. So this is one of the things that can kind of start to kick up that dust and contribute to the processing issue that we talked about during part one, that nociplastic pain. All right. It's also another thing that can contribute to that brain fog. The system is getting bogged down. It's kind of like having too many browsers open on the internet. Everything still works. It's just going to take a little bit longer. All right. But I'll give you all one guess. There's one period of time in a day when you can clean these out, get rid of these interleukins, and move on. When do you think that is? It's when you sleep. What are you having a hard time doing because you have chronic pain and chronic stress? Sleeping. So here's another part of the process that unfortunately can continue to self-perpetuate. Now, if you remember from part one, I also like my fun facts of the day. There's a chemical that relatively easily crosses the blood-brain barrier. Many of us libate on it. Libations is your clue. If you said alcohol, you're correct. Alcohol crosses the blood-brain barrier pretty easily, for better or for worse. Who knows, right? All right. Moving on, we're going to take one final trip into the brain before we talk about what we're going to do about this. Okay? One final trip into the brain. So, I want you to take a minute while I'm drawing this on the board, and I want you to think about what part of the brain is its job to process pain? What part of the brain is its job to process pain? A lot of people will guess the frontal cortex. Some people will say somewhere in the middle. And of course, we always get somebody cheeky that's like medulla oblongata, okay? One of the ones that we all remember about the parts of the brain. But I'm going to tell you all a little bit of a story, okay? I grew up with a single mom, very grateful for everything that she did for me, but we lived with my grandparents on and off many, many times, okay? Now, I was born and raised up in Minnesota, perpetually cold as far as I remember. And I remember sitting at the kitchen table with my Nana, who is an absolutely wonderful, wonderful woman. She was always cooking or baking something in the kitchen. It always smelled really great in there. I remember her being short, but this was also a time when I was short, and I could even, believe it or not, there was a time that happened. But I could kick my legs at the kitchen table, look out the window, and sit and chat and catch up with my Nana while she was cooking or baking. Okay. Now, in this story, did I just want to tell you about my Nana? She's a pretty extraordinary person, but there is a bigger point, all right? In order for me to share that story with you and you to receive the story, the language center of the brains have to light up. The language centers of the brain have to light up, excuse me. The time and place associated with memory in the temporal and parietal lobes. The actual Krebs proteins associated with keeping and storing memories in the midbrain area, as well as you talk about things like it being cold or familial relationships like love, or even hunger, talking about food in kind of the amygdala, basal ganglia, hippocampus, thalamus, all of those kind of crazy areas that we talk about in that midbrain area. Okay. The sensory and motor strip, again, talking about it being cold, talking about moving around at the kitchen table. Okay. The actual pictures associated with that memory. And last but not least, the frontal lobe, kind of packaging it and making it a cohesive thought to be shared. All of these parts of the brain have to associate and communicate with each other in order for me to share and you guys to receive that memory. So I have a map, my Nana map of those different parts of the brain communicating with each other for that one memory of sitting at the kitchen table with my Nana. Okay. What's interesting, the point is, pain is not different. There is no part of the brain whose job it is to process pain. So there's no part of the brain that is its job. But at a minimum, there's about 16 different parts of the brain that will help to process that pain. And they'll all communicate in order to create a pain map that is unique to you. Now, what's interesting, if I would have said this at the beginning of the session, I think it would make sense when we're talking about chemicals. Okay? Everything that we're talking about today, and even moving forward, everything that we're talking about is measurable. We can actually also measure your pain map. So in the research, what they did is they took participants, okay, and we have to kind of measure that zeroed out activity of the brain, right? So we have them watch Finding Nemo, because apparently that just shuts the brain off. I'm just kidding. That just happens to be what we had them watch, right? Okay, so they're watching the movie. We get their base level. We then had the participants do some sort of painful movement, okay? So you have neck pain, move your neck. You have shoulder pain, lift your shoulder. You have back pain, arch your back or lift your leg, okay? What parts of their brain then lit up? That's their pain map. What happened next is they were taken into a treatment room and they were given 20 minutes of education. The same education you got during part 1, only the sensitive alarm system story. After that, we put them back into the functional MRI machine to see what their pain map looked like when they performed the painful movement again. We saw less activity in their pain map. Why? What did we reduce? Well, it's my favorite word. Again, we reduced threat. If somebody is afraid of something, how can we get them to feel better about it? You teach them why they don't have to be afraid. Here are all the reasons why you don't have to worry about spiders. Here's all the reasons you don't have to be scared of the dark. Here's all the reasons why you don't have to worry about flying. We tell you all of those reasons. We educate, right? What's interesting is the same thing works with pain. When you understand what's going on, when you understand the process of what's happening, it makes it less scary. You're in a little bit more control, back in the driver's seat, as we were talking about. All right. So thankfully, I'm not saying that me talking at you and educating you is going to take your pain level from an 8 to a 4. But over time, if we continue to lower the threat level, if that was the input into the system, we're going to have less output, which is pain. Now, the last thing to talk about, I said I'd allude to this later, is we're going to take 3 parts of the brain, and all of these numbers are completely arbitrary. They don't mean anything. It's just to illustrate this point. So let's take 3 parts of the brain. Let's take memory. Let's take attention. And let's take emotion. So if a quarter of your memory centers are busy helping to process pain, how good is your memory, right? If half of your attention centers are busy helping to process pain, how good is your attention? And if 3/4 of your emotional centers are busy helping to process pain, how good are you at regulating your emotions? This is where we can see pain really kind of unfortunately enslave that brain and send a lot of processing power towards pain. This is where you can see that brain fog, people not remembering things or having issues with attention, or again, flying off the handle, or, retracting from other people and avoiding situations because of pain. All right. So hopefully I haven't completely stripped you all of hope. Let's move on to what can we do about it? Now, this is the part in this journey where I have to apologize. I really am sorry. This is the tough part. There is not some crazy new magic bullet here that you've never heard of. The things that we're going to talk about next are very, very cliche. But 2 things that I think are really important to note, okay? 1, they're cliche for a reason. They have a lot of research to support that there's benefit. But number 2, remember I told you, all of the things that we're talking about today are measurable. This is no exception. So at this time, individually, we know the measured benefit of reducing pain and chronic stress. But as a combination, these 4 things, there is no better treatment for chronic pain at this time that doesn't have any side effects or major risks. Okay? So at this time, no better treatment exists. We really have to be candid and kind of think about embracing a different approach. We're in the 4th wave of the epidemic, the opioid epidemic, for a reason. The way that we've been talking about pain and the way that we've been trying to help people who have pain, it has not worked. So we have to be a little bit more candid about, why isn't this working? Okay, why is this continuing to be an issue? So without further ado, we're going to talk about the big 4. The big 4. Okay. Now, as I've already alluded to, the things on this list are going to shock and awe you. You'll never guess. You'll never guess what's on this list. All right, all joking aside, the first one is exercise. Big shock, right? Big shock. But here's what's interesting. Here's the part that people don't expect. The type of exercise that's most beneficial for people who have chronic pain is aerobic exercise. So your cardio. The first reason why aerobic exercise is so important is this. Nerves need 3 things to be happy. Number 1, they need movement. Our nerves kind of slide and glide in the track that they exist, and they need to do that sliding and gliding in order to be happy. Okay? They need space. If you've ever sat in a funny position or slept funny on your arm and woken up with your hand or foot being asleep, you know nerves do not like to be pressed on. Okay? Last but not least, the whole reason we're talking about this, nerves need blood flow. I told you during part 1, there are 45 miles of nerves in the human body. It only accounts for about 2% of our overall body weight or mass. Despite that, they use 25% of the oxygen from our bloodstream. So they are very, very hungry for blood flow. And just a small drop in the amount of blood flow to those nerves can cause some of that tingling. Drop it more, you're going to have numbness. Drop it more, we can actually do damage. Okay? So blood flow to the nerves, super duper important. The second reason why aerobic exercise or cardio is so important is because it increases endogenous opioid production. Now, other than the word production, are any of those words familiar? Opioid is the one you make. Opiate is the one you take. All right, so these are the natural painkillers that our body can produce. Some people have had the experience of a runner's high. I have never experienced a runner's high from running because I will only run if I'm being chased. And that's if there's no other option. Thankfully, you can experience a runner's high from any workout that's getting your heart rate up, okay? It's when you get that kind of like giddy, sort of like people start talking fast, they feel good, they have less pain, they, kind of get a second wind, all that good stuff. People are like, what was in your pre-workout? That's the sort of kind of runner's high feeling. It's equal to about 10 milligrams of morphine. All right. Now, does anybody at home, do you know what the standard dose of morphine is? If you break a bone and you end up in the ED, the emergency room, do you know what the standard dose of morphine is? It really depends. It is going to be region specific depending on where you're living, what your experience is, what your hospital is administering. But currently, the average is 1 milligram of morphine. So stuff that we make is pretty darn potent. I do want to put a small disclaimer. Even in the past few years that I've been teaching this class, this number has changed. So depending on when you're watching this video, this may not hold true. But please just know the point is the stuff that we're capable of making, it's potent. It's very, very beneficial. Okay? Moving on from that, the absolute bare minimum that you need, okay? The bare minimum kind of cardio that you need in order to get this system going is 50% of your max heart rate for 20 minutes. Okay? Now, because most of us watching this video are in our 20s, okay, that's only like 100 beats per minute. It's just a brisk walk. It's nothing fancy. It's nothing arduous. Okay? The ideal, however, is going to be about 60 to 80% of your max heart rate for 20 minutes. Now, this one varies a little bit more depending on what formula you're using to calculate your heart rate. For most of us, this is going to be somewhere probably around about 140 to 170 beats a minute. Again, depending on your age and what formula you're using. But this is where you're going to have that maximum production. You can work out too hard, though. You bridge too far past 80% of your max heart rate, and you will actually increase the production of those pro-inflammatory interleukins that we were talking about. It will also deplete your immune system. So not only will those pro-inflammatory chemicals kind of counteract the good chemicals that are being released, but because it's taxing to the immune system, you actually make yourself more likely to get sick as well. So again, keep your target about there, you'll get the most benefit. Moving right along, the next thing that we're going to talk about, another big shocker on the list, sleep. The number one most important thing that you have to understand about sleep is that it's a habit. Okay? So how many people have tried sleepy time tea like one night and you're like, I didn't sleep better. Screw this tea, it didn't work, right? How long does it take to change a habit? Well, there's new research that if you can perform the habit relatively frequently, we can change our habits within about 7 to 14 days. But for something like sleep, on average, it's about 30 days. 30 days to really change the habit of sleep, okay? Now, for members of the military community, I do not harp on this very much. It's very, very difficult because sleep might be one of the things that you have the least amount of control over. Whether that's because you don't have control over your schedule, because you have a highly variable schedule, therefore it's very hard to establish a habit, It might be region specific. There's so many factors that can make it nearly impossible for sleep to be a priority. However, it has to be. We've already iterated a couple of times how important sleep is. There are some tricks that you can use even when you have a little bit less control. Like it or not, we are animals, we are a species, and we can use that to our advantage. If you think of Pavlov's dog, all right, for anybody who doesn't remember, Dr. Pavlov had a dog, and what he would do is he would ring a bell and he'd give the dog food. He'd ring a bell and he'd give the dog food, and he'd ring a bell and he'd give the dog food. What happened when he rang the bell? Well, the dog would start to salivate. And then what he demonstrated through his research is he could ring the bell and wait a little while and then give the dog food. Ring the bell, wait a little longer, and then give the dog food. Ring the bell, and maybe not even give the dog food, but he would still notice that the dog would salivate, that the dog would drool, okay, in anticipation of getting food. So you can use this to your advantage by establishing a bedtime routine, okay? Having things that trigger yourself to say, it is time to go to bed, because if I do A, B, C, D means I fall asleep. Okay, it just, you make it very, very linear. For some people, that might be I brush my teeth, I take a shower, I read for 15 minutes, I shut off the light and go to bed. I had another patient that was, I spray lavender spray on my pillow and in my room. I go brush my teeth, I go wash my face, and then when I come back in the room and I smell, it helps me relax, and then I lay down and I basically just fall asleep. But the nice thing is when you establish that routine, even when you're in a different environment, it can still work because we're so susceptible to that operant conditioning. It will teach you it's time to go to sleep. I was very, very fortunate growing up, although you have to lower your expectations a lot because I am from the land of 10,000 lakes. My family did have a cabin. It was nothing glamorous by any stretch of the imagination, but I'm still very grateful for it. And because of that, we were able to go for boat rides. And it never failed that every time I got in the boat, I would fall asleep. It was just so relaxing, just being on the water and the rocking. And so it didn't matter how well I slept or how little I slept or anything. I'd get in the boat, we'd get out of the bay, boom, I just would fall asleep. Okay. Not a fancy boat. Don't get any expectations there. It was just a cute little 16-foot fishing boat. Loved it. Metal, and it was, you just sat in the sun and it was beautiful. But the moral of the story is that was operant conditioning for me. Every time I got in the boat, boom, I would fall asleep. You can use that to your advantage. The next thing that I want to talk about for sleep is this. If this looks familiar to you, okay, it's because a lot of us have some sort of device that's tracking this nowadays. These are the sleep cycles, all right? The top line is when you're awake, okay? This middle section is that REM or dreaming sleep, and the bottom section is the non-REM, deep, core, or restorative sleep. It goes by a lot of different names. You'll notice something about the pattern about how I drew this. As we go through subsequent cycles, we get less and less of that deep restorative sleep. But something interesting happens with sleep in particular. If you go to bed after midnight, we find that people don't start their sleep cycles over here. They actually start their sleep cycles over here. So every hour that you are in bed before midnight, as far as restorative sleep, it can count for 2 hours after midnight. So if you, like many people, are participating in revenge procrastination, which is where you stay up really late because it's the only time that you get for yourself. Sometimes what I ask patients to do, let's say you go to bed at 2 o'clock in the morning and you have to get up at 6. I just ask my patients to flip it. Go to bed at 10, wake up at 2. Okay? You still get that time span where it's just you, the rest of the world isn't awake. But for some people, they feel better because they're getting more of that restorative sleep. Now, I keep mentioning how important sleep is, okay? Research says that if I can just get you to sleep more or better, 80% reduction in chronic pain symptoms. It is that important. It is ridiculously important to make sure you're getting sleep. One last thing that comes up a lot during the classes about sleep. Sometimes people will talk about, but I'm a night owl. I can't go to sleep early. Again, we are a species. We are animals. And by and large, if I take and place somebody in a wonderfully safe environment that's very comforting to them, okay? So typically the research is done in the woods, but if the woods are terrifying for you, it's not going to work very well, is it? But ideally, if we place you in a very comfortable, safe environment and we remove the majority, if not all, technology, it takes about 3 days. And then humans will start to get tired when the sun goes down and they wake up when the sun comes up. Okay, regardless of if they identify it as night owls or morning people. So again, feeling safe is kind of one of the first important things to kind of note about, quality of sleep, because again, stress can really impede our ability to sleep, right? But then number two, also just kind of tapping into that sort of influence of, unfortunately, technology and how much that itself can also keep us awake. So just more food for thought on sleep, very, very important. The next thing on the list to talk about, we're all trying to manage or reduce it. Stress. Okay. So normally the way that this goes down when we get to this part in the class, I ask the participants in the class, I want you to tell me everything that reduces stress. Not just what worked for you, but tell me everything that helps to reduce stress. And thankfully, over the span of time, we get a pretty exhaustive list. So I'm going to start to kind of rapid fire and write some of the things that come up on here, some things that are pretty common, okay? So obviously, sleep, food, relaxation. Ooh, wow, not relation. Sorry, I can spell, I promise. Relaxation, self-care, friends, family, pets, vacation, travel, driving, outdoors, and particularly with outdoors, water. There's a reason why humans live around water oftentimes. Hobbies, reading, sports, video games, TV, movies, music, art, dancing, breathing, meditation, yoga, journaling, social media, money, fighting, cleaning, work. And then usually sometime all or part of this will get brought up, but the rock star diet, drugs, sex, alcohol. Okay. So what is the point? Why do we want this list to be so large? Okay. Well, some of the things on here, they're double-edged swords. That's the first thing to kind of identify. All right. So friends, family, pets. Okay. This can be a double-edged sword. We all have people that we interact with that we get energy from. But then we also have people that we interact with that, like, you kind of have to mentally prepare yourself. Okay, I'm going to talk to this person. It doesn't always go well, but they're still important to me, so I'm going to talk to them, right? We know that that can be a double-edged sword, all right? Something like a vacation, okay? That can be a double-edged sword. It can be really stressful to go somewhere fun and go through all of the traveling. But once you get there, wow, what a great experience. I was able to relax. I was able to enjoy a new place, things like that. Um, More double-edged swords, hobbies. We have a very nasty, nasty habit of describing hobbies as good or bad. Reading, that's a really good hobby. It's so healthy for you, right? Social media or video games, that's bad for you. That's lazy. You shouldn't do that. I don't know about you guys, but I know a bookworm, okay, who left to their own devices will sit and read for hours and hours and hours and hours. And then you check in on that person, they're like, I haven't moved in 8 hours. I need to go to the bathroom and I haven't drank any water. Is that healthy? No. I also know people who play video games maybe 4 hours a week as a way to connect with people who no longer live in the same area. Is that healthy? maybe a little bit more, right? So again, how you're utilizing your hobbies is going to make a difference as to whether or not they're a healthy hobby or not. Additionally, I want you to think about a lot of people use social media for stress reduction or try to. Kind of an interesting double-edged sword. So I want you to imagine that every night we go home and we just scroll on social media for 3 hours. Okay. Well, the rule with any of these hobbies, if after the 3 hours you think that is exactly what I needed, I feel better, I have less stress, then it is actually a stress relieving or reducing activity. However, if at the end of that activity you think, I should have been doing something different, it's just a distraction. That doesn't mean it's bad, but it is not helping to reduce your stress. Another double edged sword that's on here, alcohol. 1 ounce of alcohol is enough to reduce the amount of time that you spend in deep restorative sleep. But if somebody comes in and they say, I can't sleep unless I have a nightcap, what do you think I'm going to tell them to do? Have the nightcap. If that's the difference between sleep or no sleep, we can work on the process of trying to improve this so maybe you don't need the nightcap. It's not about judging and saying this is what's good, this is what's bad. It's about figuring out how to get healthier, how to get better, and how to actually reduce your stress. Another reason why we want this list to be so big, okay? I'll ask somebody, hey, would you meditate for 20 minutes a day if I told you to? Absolutely not. Never going to happen. Oh, okay, cool. If I asked you to go for a 20-minute walk outside every day, would you do it? Absolutely, I would love to do that. So there's where some of these things are just not going to work for people if they're no interest to you. So again, find the things that are going to be beneficial for you and be honest. Is this something that's actually helping me? Okay. If you have more things to add to the list, good. Okay. Make sure you're finding what works for you. The last thing on our list here, the big four, is the one that is actually a shocker to most people. They don't expect it to be on this list. However, it's the number one predictor as to whether or not you will get better when you have chronic pain. It's goal setting. So usually the way that I like to do this is I say, hey, who here in the class, who here wants to have less pain? And inevitably, pretty much everybody will raise their arm and say, I want to have less pain. That's the reason why I'm here. Perfect. So then I ask, how likely are you to get better if your goal is to have less pain? People say, oh, it's really high, or maybe it's medium, or I don't know. Well, the answer is it's almost zero. If your goal is to have less pain, the likelihood of you getting better is almost zero. Why? Because this is what it looks like to have chronic pain. You have good days and bad days, right? So are you getting better? Well, how about now? What about a month from now or 2 months from now? How do you know if you're actually getting better? So if we actually want this line to look like this, where it actually goes down over time, what we need is a second line. Okay. Now this second line is a very broad topic, and it's function. So we talked about this a little bit during part 1. What do you want to be able to do that pain is stopping you from doing? What are your goals? The easiest example to kind of illustrate this, I want you to imagine for a second. I cannot run more than 1/4 of a mile without increasing my pain. Now, 1 month from now, I can run 1 mile without increasing my pain. But this day that I run 1 mile, it happens to coincide with a bad day. I'm having more pain than I maybe have had in a little while. Am I getting better? Yes, I have to be. If I can do more activities that were previously bothersome, if I can do more without making my pain worse, the system has to be getting better. And the really cool thing is when you finally latch onto this, that's where we finally see the flip happen. That's where we see people's pain level actually come down, is they're back in the driver's seat. They're doing the things that they need to do. They're doing the things that they want to do, and it has no impact on their pain. If you are now doing things the way that you want to or need to, and pain isn't what's driving the bus anymore, you are going to feel significantly better. So, when you look at this, again, I apologize, they're all really, really cliche. But again, the combination of these four things, there's no better treatment for chronic pain. You should not try to jump in with both feet and do all of these things at once. You should pick and choose one or two things. Remember, we said changing the habit of sleep, that can take 30 days. When you're looking at your goals, maybe you have goals to get better sleep or goals of reducing stress, you want to be evaluating those goals over 4, 6, 12 weeks. This is a process. It's a process and it takes a lot of work. I'm sorry you're going through it. I wish you the best. If you need more specific information, please make sure you come on into physical therapy. Again, we talked about if you need to see somebody who does this stuff on the regular. Those of us that have gone through the additional training, the pain neuroscience education, we're going to have the credentials TPS, therapeutic pain specialty, to be able to make sure that we're developing an individualized plan for you. Just kind of summarizing the goal of part one and part two, it is to give you some ideas on what might actually help with your pain. But the other thing is to make sure that we're speaking the same language. So when you're working with me or somebody like me, if I start talking about interleukins or the alarm system or things like that, we're just speaking the same language. So thank you so much for joining. I hope that this information was valuable to you. Again, if we could be serving you at WACH Physical Therapy, we'll look forward to serving you and it'll be our privilege to work with you. Other than that, take good care.